All right, well, I guess it's 10:35, so everybody else can just do standing room if they come in late. Thanks, everybody, for coming to my sideshow in a very large room. I'm Keith Vaccaro. I'm the director of the legal director of Social Impact Lab. We work with legal organizations to help make them more accessible with mobile technology. And this is the way it proceeds. And the theme of the conference is the next wave, so I figured I'd start out with a bad pun and talk about some other waves, assuming that I can actually get this clicker to work, which I can't. This is a map here of tweets that happened during Superstorm Sandy in 2011. You'll see that most of them were concentrated in Manhattan and parts of Brooklyn that I can't afford, and very few sort of out in the Rockaways and out in Staten Island. And as the storm was going on, there were kind of thoughts that power companies and other organizations could use this information in order to kind of pinpoint and identify problems before kind of traditional means alerted them. This is a map of deaths in Hurricane Sandy. It looks a little bit different. In fact, it looks almost the exact opposite. And what technology seduces us with is the idea that the entire world is at our fingertips, when in reality only a fraction of that is true. And most people tend to be cropped out of view, or at least a portion of them are. And even though this may not seem like much, these people that are cropped out of view are often the most vulnerable in a given population. And so this small bar, which may be 20% of users who, in the US, who don't have access to the internet, this is actually 60 million adults. And when you break down this population of the unconnected in from a demographic sense, from a demographic sense, these people tend to be made up of the most vulnerable populations, both minorities, the elderly, and the poor. And these populations in particular are ones that have acute needs for legal services. And the poor in particular is an interesting example. Legal aid in this country is mostly funded by Legal Services Corporation. And in order to be eligible for legal aid, you need to be at least at 125% of the poverty line or below. And for a family of four, that's about a hair below $30,000. And so what this means for this population is that about 60% of them use the internet. So when Legal Services Corporation, say, puts up a legal aid tool that allows you to find legal aid by entering your zip code on an online form, at best, they're going to reach 60% of the population that they're targeting. So the first takeaway then is that technology is only as effective as the platform that it's built upon. And whether or not that's the internet, or whether or not that's Twitter or Facebook or something else, the percentage of the population that you're trying to reach is essentially going to be only the people that are actually using the platform. And it's not just about access to the platform, it's also about habit, and it's about continued use. And the same sort of goes that somebody can just go to the library and access the internet, and it will be kind of just like riding a bike. And that may be true once you've started to use technology, but for people who don't use the internet and who haven't started to use the internet yet, it may be a little bit like trying to learn how to ride a bike, and that it's going to be a little bit painful. And so expecting users, particularly in the context of legal services, to acquire additional habits is only going to add more pain to the already difficult situation they find themselves in. So if we say that high technology doesn't necessarily mean high access, then my old law professor who used to send me outlines in WordPerfect is feeling very smug right now. But legal systems have access problems too, ranging from the simple fact that lawyers are expensive, to legal language is confusing, to legal procedures are daunting. This one's not actually a joke. This is a flowchart of how to get a green card in the United States. And it might be useful for some people, but I think for somebody who doesn't speak English, this might just tell them they really need a lawyer badly. And so what happens is because legal procedures are inaccessible, legal systems are inaccessible, it pushes people toward legal aid organizations that are, by and large, unable to meet the demand. LSC estimates that 50% of eligible individuals are turned away from the organizations that they grant, and leaving around 80% of low-income individuals whose civil legal needs are unmet, to say nothing of criminal legal needs. By and large, then, this becomes sort of a lack of resource problem, or resources problem. With limited administrative resources for legal aid organizations, they deliberately slow intake processes by doing things like hiding their phone number or requiring people to visit in person. On the other side, what that ends up doing is driving people who still need legal help into kind of other avenues. And in many cases, that ends up being pro se offices. So in some states, particularly in Massachusetts, 70% of litigants in housing court are pro se, 80% in probate court. In consumer debt courts in New York City, it's 99%. And pro se offices, by and large, also aren't equipped to handle this, and particularly in state courts, which continue to get constraints on their budget. So if we've got these legal resource problems, technology can actually help with this. And the type of technology that can help with it is in being a digitizing step. So what becomes difficult when you're dealing with low-income and low-connectivity individuals is the repetition of manual processes, something like answering 95 voicemails and then writing them all down, or filling out paper forms and then typing them into a computer. And so these additional administrative steps kind of add lead time to a legal process and to a legal aid system. And so finding technology as a digitizing step can have a transformative impact, but the trick is to find the right vector for this digitization. And so here we've got SMS. And so the organization that I work with was spun out of a company that designs a software called Frontline SMS, which helps organizations professionally manage text messages, sending and receiving, and dealing with them in something that looks sort of like an inbox. The advantage of SMS is that, unlike the internet, and unlike Facebook, and unlike Twitter, almost everybody has a mobile phone. And almost everybody who has a mobile phone is capable of using SMS, because that capability is already built in. And the simplicity of SMS allows people to quickly pick up that new habit that may be required in order to interact with the system, in order to interact and gain a legal service. So in this sense, I'm not advocating for SMS as a complete replacement for a legal aid system. That would seem silly. But rather, it's the kind of, mobile can be the connective tissue between individuals who don't have access to the internet and more sophisticated technology systems that legal aid providers continue to run and continue to advance. And so the interface then for dealing with text messages would then look like something like this. And so not only can you deal and communicate with clients as though you were writing an email, but you can do it over text message. The system can also recognize message content and automatically route it to the right place. So it can set up auto replies, it can add a contact to a particular group or a subscription, or it can pass this information on to a more sophisticated web service. And so you may not even ever look at this interface if you run a legal aid organization. But instead what you can do is that you can enable an automated workflow and use that to reduce administrative time at very simple levels. And so I'll walk through a couple of examples. So the first is around intake management. So think back to the LSC example that I talked about, I guess, only a couple of minutes ago. So if this system, which essentially inputs a zip code and then spits out a phone number and a website and an address if need be, a similar system can be operated with SMS, where one would just text in a zip code. The system would automatically recognize the zip code and then text back the appropriate legal aid office. But more than that, if the legal aid office so chose, they could set up a simple sort of triage system, which would ask straightforward questions, not with the goal of identifying what somebody's legal problem is, but identifying who the right person that they should talk to at that organization. And so what you're doing with the intake management is that you're solving that initial routing problem that courts and legal aid systems struggle with because they have limited administrative resources. The second area is process tracking and transparency and reminders. And one project that we're running right now is funded by a grant from Google. We're helping to expedite a land allocation process in Odisha, India. And what we're doing is we're equipping. This process is being run by community-level workers and government officials to do a household survey in rural villages in Odisha in order to identify who has no land and who has kind of no homestead, and then giving them parcels of land and then giving them formal title to land. And nobody at kind of any point in this process, except up to the very high district level, has access to computers or has access to the internet. And so normally when a problem is identified, you've got about a month lag time before somebody gets to it in a meeting, and then another month before the problem is solved. And with SMS, you can get that digitized small piece of information about where a process is going, and forward that on to somebody who can actually take action. And then on the other side, so for individuals who say might be going through a court system in the United States, that same process information can be picked up by the people who are benefiting from this legal aid program and from this land allocation program, so that they can text in, say, a case number and get back the status of where it is through the system. So that in this context, it can be more than just somebody shows up and 12 months later, you get a parcel of land and a title. And in an American court system, it can be more than just you show up and then 9 months later, you get a ruling from a judge. The third is incident reporting and domestic violence. And in particular, I think the best example that we have is 4 or 5 years ago, an agency in Oklahoma used Frontline SMS to set up a domestic violence reporting system, mostly in just a small county, and it was connected with both the agency and the local sheriff's office. And they ran a pilot for about a year and then continued to use it after that. And in this pilot year, every month, there were 6,000 to 8,000 incoming messages. So from people reporting domestic violence. About 2,200 of those were asking for the domestic violence hotline. There were about 12 to 15 requests a month for police intervention. And just to give you an idea of scale, that 6,000 to 8,000, well, a little bit apples to oranges, is more than the entire volume of domestic violence cases that Oklahoma processed for the entire year. So the advantage of SMS can be that it provides a discrete way of reporting something and of communicating and asking for help that a phone call or a face-to-face meeting may not be able to provide. And out of this information, at least a local district attorney in the first year of the pilot was able to pull 18 convictions out of these reports. And the last one is maybe the most obvious one, or at least for people who text or have kids that text, which is client communication. We originally got our start helping people book appointments with clinics in rural South Africa. So rather than walking 10 kilometers to the nearest office to book an appointment and then back again to get the appointment and so on, you can use SMS to do simple communication. And this is a particular value not only in remote areas such as Indian reservations that have limited resources and limited individuals to administer a large geography, but it can also be used in urban areas and in particular with homeless youth who have limited access to the internet, and for individuals who may not have the capability to create formal relationships with, say, an internet provider. So this is sort of the idea of mobile as connective tissue, but all the way down to kind of the very edges of connectivity. And beyond that, there are kind of many more ways that you can use it. Right? It can be used in court administration, it can be used for immigration, it can be used to do parole reporting and dispute resolution, and so on and so forth. And these are all projects that we're working on. And the best part about it is that, for the most part, it's relatively cheap. A texting plan in the US costs about $20 a month. That'll get you several thousand messages a month. The pilot that I mentioned in Oklahoma ran 6,000 to 8,000 off of a phone that was plugged in to a computer. You can also, we have an application now that will let you connect your Android phone and get even more message volume. And in the event that you really need to be sending, say, hundreds of thousands of messages a month, we connect with virtual number providers that can charge as low as a tenth of a penny per message. So the software is free to download. So in terms of getting set up and actually executing on a relatively low technology project, for organizations like legal aid systems that have limited resources, SMS is an ideal vector to capture that slice of the population that isn't going to be connected via the internet. So SMS is great, but it's also not a silver bullet. And in that sense, it's important in order to kind of complete this access to justice mission that you engage accessibility at every level of connectivity. So both from people who may not even have mobile phones and doing kind of manual outreach to individuals to people that have relatively high connectivity. Because not only, accessibility isn't just a technological concept. It's also the idea of providing language discipline. Because for people who have legal education, the nuances of a particular legal proceeding may be more clear to them, but it may not be clear to somebody who's interacting with the legal system for the first time. So again, for something like this, it might be super helpful if you're a first-year law student who signed up for this suffering anyway, but probably not as helpful for somebody who's actually trying to get a green card And particularly when some of these steps are 3 or 4 lines long and might require an additional flow chart just to figure out how to get from step A to step B. And so what we're doing here is we're not obviating the need for legal help, but rather what we're trying to do is accommodate for the reality that legal help and legal assistance isn't there from day 0. And so what technology can do is it can essentially provide routing. And so provide a common technology agnostic interface that will allow an individual to have a legal problem or to identify that they have a legal problem and then be routed to the correct provider. Because just as individuals who aren't part of the legal system or who don't have a legal education don't necessarily recognize the nuance within the law itself, they also may not recognize the nuance of kind of legal organizations. And so there's the risk of viewing a legal system as sort of a monolithic system. So it doesn't really matter if they're dealing with probate court or if they're dealing with a probation officer. To them, it's all one system, and they have one legal problem. And so a lot of the administration time for legal aid organizations tends to be taxed because they have difficulty routing people to the correct place. And so one advantage of SMS or any kind of technology interface in order to really encourage access to justice and encourage trust in a legal system is to be able to get somebody to a person as soon as possible. Because ultimately that's what people are looking for when they're looking for legal help. I'm not optimistic, and maybe you are more than I am, that technology systems will be able to completely replace legal help. But what it can do is help get people to the right place. And the last point that I want to leave with is that the future will continue to arrive unevenly. Waiting for clients to catch up with technology is going to be essentially a fool's errand, because there are always going to be clients that are left behind, and there are always going to be clients that are of kind of more sophisticated technology. Your kids are always going to have better smartphones than you are. So what legal aid organizations and what the legal system has an obligation to do in order to provide access to justice is to pursue a multi-platform approach, kind of with the acknowledgement that every client is not going to be able to engage with the system on every platform. And so SMS may be only able to kind of capture a slice, and it may end up being yesterday's technology. But by embracing it and by integrating it into digital systems, then you can help try and build a system that's a little bit more accessible, a little bit more transparent, and a little bit more comprehensible. So that's all I've got. Questions from anyone? Yes?
I'm just having some trouble understanding how the clients would know where to text or where to send their messages.
Sure. So it's partially an outreach effort. You know, so for a local organization, like one of the organizations that we're working with is Bay Legal. And so part of our, what we do is kind of help do manual outreach, which essentially is, you know, informing people about the number. And it also tends to be a thing where if people are aware that this is an avenue, that information will spread quicker than you think, which is something that I was a little bit surprised to learn. But in speaking with legal aid organizations, especially in urban areas like in Los Angeles, they tell me that they have to keep their phone number a secret, and that when it gets out, they're just flooded with calls. You know, so it's, you know, part of it is kind of understanding that somebody's going to be trying this for the first time, and it's going to be a little bit experimental, which is why it's really important that you know, get somebody to a person and prove its efficiency first. But once you've done that and you've proven it as something that's valuable, then you tend to be able to, the outreach will sort of carry itself, I think, from there, depending on the community you're reaching. Yeah? Do
you have a model for, I can see the urban being a little easier, but for saturating the rural area?
For outreach, or?
How would you do that?
Yeah, so it can be a combination of pamphlets. What we tend to do, especially in very rural areas, and a lot of our experience is sort of in developing countries as well, is to follow the contours of the community. You know, so if there are community centers like churches or schools or places that people frequently go, exactly, public libraries, and you know, also kind of social service agencies. You know, because you're trying to capture sort of vulnerable population, so it's important to sort of match that where you can. And in the US, it's a little bit more difficult because only a small subset of people actually are going to qualify and need this type of help.
That's just the problem, it seems to me, in my state. We have one number you can call to see if you qualify. and they turn away, 60 or more, 80% of the people that actually qualify because they can't serve them because they don't have the funding and they only serve a certain slice of the underserved.
Right.
So getting to legal aid would not help.
Sure. Well, I think that there's kind of two pieces to that, or I'm hoping. One of them is that, through reducing kind of the administrative time that's required for each case, what we tend to find is that increases a little bit, not necessarily a lot, but it increases a little bit what somebody's capacity is to actually take on clients. And the other part is that there's this, on the one hand, there's the LSC-funded network, and then on the other hand, there's kind of another network of legal aid organizations that aren't LSC funded, but that maybe provide help in particular specialized areas. But finding those for clients, even ones that are assisted by, say, a social service agency, is a challenge.
But that, I think would work in a state like mine, I'm from South Carolina.
Okay.
If you're trying to get help for battered women or things like that, that they don't know, or they need to text.
Right.
They may not know how to get there, but if you tell them that, they have a phone, they can possibly get connected.
Right, and so it's
Not turned away as much.
exactly, and so it's a question of kind of how many organizations can you get on board to make sort of a unified interface for something like this? Because domestic violence may be an obvious case, but somebody who is looking for a domestic violence helpline might first call a legal aid office, right? And it's a question of, are they going to be routed somewhere properly, or are they going to just be turned away? And it might likely just be the latter. Question in the back, or? Sure.
What was that interface, the SMS and computer interface? I didn't forget.
Sure. It's called. I'll go back to it so I can show you. So it's called Frontline SMS, and it exists right now in 3 forms. So originally it existed as a desktop application that you could freely download, and you wouldn't need internet to use it. You would just plug in a USB card with a USB modem with a SIM card in it. And so then what that happens is that text messages would then show up in this as though they were emails, and you can respond to them and create new messages. And then on the left you have activities, and with the activities you can set up something like an auto forward or an automatic reply, or you can pass that data on to a web service, and so on and so forth. We also have now a cloud-based application, which you don't need a computer to be on and running to receive the messages. That's $10 a month. And then you can connect with it through either a virtual number that you purchase through somebody like Twilio or Clickatel. We don't charge for the messages. Or you can download an application if you have an Android smartphone. And what that will do is route your messages through the smartphone and then back to the system.
What's it called again?
It's called Frontline SMS.
Frontline SMS, okay.
Yep. And so the activities, and I guess the robust part of it is that it can do recognition based on keywords and based on senders. And so it's kind of the automatic filtering that you would get, as opposed to just having a bunch of text messages show up now on a computer screen instead of on your phone. And we're also developing. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm not entirely sure what I'm asking.
Sure.
But I'm going to give it a shot anyways.
Go for it.
It seems to me you can do this SMS. You don't need a special application. You can just use regular email. Because that's how I do it sometimes. Like, for instance, I'm on Verizon, and I can send a text to an email address, and I can reply directly back to someone's cell phone. I could put your phone number at, vtext whatever, bam, goes straight to a phone, back and forth.
Sure. So for simple client communication and for making it convenient for you as for email, then yes, you can just do that. The advantage of this type of system or an SMS system is the ability to take that information that comes in and then do something else with it. So if I'm texting in, crisis, then that information is, routed to the sheriff's department that then asks me 3 more questions about the help that I need. And those are all automated questions. Or if I'm texting in a zip code, as somebody who just has access to the SMS.
This just helps automate it.
So this automates a lot of that work. And so it's automation and it's sorting as well. So, with these kind of automated steps, you can mimic, say, a court proceeding. And you can set up automated SMS reminders for somebody who's in a particular court proceeding with a case number and with an attorney. so they can communicate with the client directly, or the client can get SMS reminders and can get more kind of information about how their case is proceeding.
So I'm wondering if there's any local customization that can be done. So I'm just thinking my jurisdiction, it has problems or issues that other parts of the country don't have.
What example? Or?
Well, I'm in Hawaii, so
Okay.
we have Native Hawaiian rights issues.
Mm-hmm.
And similar to what my colleague here from South Carolina was saying about people getting turned away because they don't know where to go to get their help. And a lot of times they come into my library. I work a law library in Hawaii,
Mhm.
it's only one and we're it. So when they get turned away from legal aid or wherever they think they should be, they come to us for assistance. And usually we can be this, that's right, we route them to the right agency. But I'm thinking if we employed something like this to streamline that intake, so there are specific offices that we can send our Native Hawaiians to for assistance with, if they have property issue, for example, or something specific to their group that isn't generic throughout the country, right? So
Sure.
there's special agencies that help people from a special group.
Right.
So
Right.
I'm sort of wondering if
No, absolutely. And this software is used kind of not only for legal organizations, but for kind of organizations of every stripe. It's the same software that's used for election monitoring in Nigeria versus aid delivery in Pakistan. And so what these activities will allow you to do is create very simple rules. So, if somebody texts in, they might send a text in that says, help, and then you might send them back a poll that has 5 options. Do you need help with housing or something in your family, or 2 or 3 others that are relatively simple.
something.
Exactly. Or maybe there's an other, and the other directs to you for more kind of specialized assistance, and you can type a response, and then housing passes it to somebody else, and then that organization might have an intake with 2 more questions, and then it might end with an appointment.
So you can't do that.
You can do that, yeah. So it's customizable and it's easy to use, and we provide both support for free if it's something that you just want to do on your own, or if it's something that you want to bring in lots of organizations to do, then you can call somebody like me, and I'm always happy to come to Hawaii and help out.
Okay.
Just curious, is there any anticipated coordination maybe already is between the ATJ clinic project that Columbia and Miami are working on? Because it seems like this would potentially be a good fit. And I think they've recognized that there's some gaps. They make assumptions about internet access, but this seems like this would be a first level to that.
Yeah, no, I haven't been introduced to the project yet, but that's something that I'd like to be, because I definitely think that, and clinics I think are also kind of a good entry point for something like this, especially in a kind of a tech-phobic industry like law. Having people that are a little bit more willing to try new things than law students can be a valuable resource.
Well, and to go along with the library question,
Yeah.
we have a library from New Mexico.
Okay.
And so for maybe multiple user management, is it possible, desirable to have, say, somebody in the library, somebody in clinic who could manage this interface and coordinate, or is it basically one person really should be in working on this?
You can have multiple people. I think it really depends on the type of endpoint that you want to, get somebody to. So if the clinic is going to be the endpoint for somebody, and maybe they're routed through the library, then maybe you have 2 people, one so that the library can route them to somewhere else. So there are, and then it also, I guess, depends on if there are different numbers that you want to communicate from. So if one number is the library and the other number is the clinic, and that separation can be valuable, especially if the clinic only provides a subset of services. So then they can rely on, say, the library to find out information, and then the clinic to find out from something else. But it's really kind of up to you.
Okay, there's a little piece I'm sort of missing.
All right.
And I'm not sure this is really where you're going with this, but it's one of the reasons why I'm here in this session. It's what to do about a lot of people who are in that donut hole. The family of 4 that that, okay, they make so little, they can afford legal services, and there's the other end of the scale where people make so much money, they can afford legal services, but what about that 80 to 90% in the middle that can't afford legal services? It's nice that we can route people to where they go, but what happens when there's nowhere for them to go? They can't afford it, and they make too much to get it for free.
Sure.
There's not a lot of places that people can go.
That's true. I think that there are kind of two problems buried in there, right? The first problem is the market problem generally, which is to say that there isn't or there might not be a market for legal services at a cost that a certain swath of the population can afford. And I think the second part of that problem, and I think the one that's maybe more relevant to this, or at least something that we can help with, as opposed to just texting lawyers to tell them to charge less, is doing that kind of market making. So for lawyers in small firms or medium-sized firms, which comprise most of the bar, who do provide services at a rate that would be much lower than what somebody might expect to pay, there's an opportunity for a system like this to be able to match people, client and lawyer, via SMS. It may get to the point where if we're looking at that 80 to 90% and most of them are connected in some way to the internet, then that may be something that you build the internet interface and an SMS interface, and then you kind of have some way for, then it almost becomes sort of like a rating system for lawyers. But I think that, to me, I think that that market matching would be something that would be doable with this.
I'm kind of curious a little bit how this works, because right now, my law school, UMass Law, is sponsoring an incubator designed specifically to reach that middle 80 to 90% who make too much to get free legal help, but make too little to be able to afford a lawyer.
Right.
So we're trying to reach that donut hole of people on an affordable sliding scale, whatever they can afford. And this seems like an interesting way of reaching some people who may not, they can't afford legal help.
Right.
And they probably can't afford computers either. So how do you reach those people? That's what's going on back in my head.
Right. Also, I think the problem that you'll need to solve, obviously, is bringing in that network of lawyers, that you've got some legal help at whatever price points that you have, right? Some sliding scale of.
Well, that's not. I'm on the technology side.
Okay.
That piece has already been solved.
Okay, great. So that's somebody else's problem. So then for us on the technology side, one thing that you could do for something like this, right, is if you're pulling in somebody's income, right, as a household income, and maybe we'll just call it every 10,000 or every 5,000, you could even set up something like keywords, right, that would recognize the amount of income they've reported and then match it to the appropriate scale for costs. So you might say if somebody makes $50,000 a year, they might only be able to afford legal help at $100 an hour or some other number. The additional thing that you could do that I think would be just as interesting, but it would be difficult, but I think it would be something that we'd be interested in working with as well, is having a triage system or a simple kind of series of a few questions that tries to guess the difficulty of somebody's legal problem. So then you end up with two metrics, right? You end up with the metric of how much can somebody afford based on their income, and also how much are they likely to spend in terms of an hours requirement. And for some areas of law, maybe something like immigration, it's actually probably pretty easy, right? The firms that you engage with can probably give you an estimate of this is about how many hours something will take for, say, an H-1B if it's of low difficulty, medium difficulty, and high difficulty, right? And so then at least you've got a range of numbers, and then you can do this kind of matching. That would be, I think, the approach that I would try to take. Does that answer your question or come close to it? Right. Any others? Great. Well, thanks very much for coming and for occupying this very large room.
Actually, my colleagues and I,
You know, they're
the
telling
A2J author project, with the questions asked.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so we presented yesterday, so I just wanted to introduce myself and
Yeah.
touch base with you.
Yeah, great. No, I'd love to hear more about it.
Yeah, so I mean, the A2J author software basically enables some litigants to, or well, actually, it enables law students and lawyers to create these guided interviews. And litigants can actually go in and go through the interview, and it automates court forms for them.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's a great piece of software that we're trying to really push, and I just wanted to see what kind of you're with the social
Social impact. So it's, probably SMS is kind of the,
Okay,
right, it's like a bunch of organizations, but yeah.
Okay, is the SMS platform, is that what you guys are primarily using right now, or?
Yeah, so that's what we push, and then kind of my, so I work kind of in SMS plus other stuff as
Okay.
well. But, you know, one of the things that we're working with a lot is integration for some things.
Right.
But so for like ATJ, is something we're really interested in doing. Like SMS integration with existing software, so that people would be able to, you know, maybe text in to triage an interview if they don't have access to the internet.
That's an interesting, yeah, no, absolutely, there's a panel on the latest version of it, Thursday, I'll check it out. I don't know how long you're planning to stay at the conference, but it's John Mayer, who he's the director of Cali.
Okay.
They're the ones who developed the software.
Okay.
And so they're going to be presenting new versions of it, which it's going to have a mobile feature to it.
Yeah.
Not sure exactly how SMS is going to fit into that, but it might be something we'll check out.
Yeah, for sure, I'll check to see the schedule. Let me review my cards, at least like,
Yeah,
I to be able to talk more about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'd give you my card, but they're still bringing it out.
That's all right, totally, yeah, my needle was like rushed off, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's great to meet you. I'd love to talk to you in person, and see maybe there's a collaboration potentially in the future.
Yeah, fantastic.
Even better, yeah.
Sounds good. All right, thanks, Alex.
It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Take care.